So I've been getting a lot of requests on the comments on the podcast that people would love to have a live show that they can interact with us. Mattteo, what are our fans called?
The bots.
That's right. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to do the INKPULP Podcast. Oh, yeah.
Nah, that sucks.
And it's going to be on December 27th. At 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to have a live podcast that all of our bots can interact with us on, and maybe we'll have some special guests pop in.
Because everybody I know who's working in comics is either doing it on the side because they can't make a living from it, or they're doing so well, they're making $500,000 a year. I just see like this disparity between the two, and I don't know very many people, and maybe they're there and I just don't know them. I don't know very many people are making a healthy middle-class living in comics. Let's end on actionable steps for people listening to this. If they're wanting to do comics, how to go about that.
Just don't do it. That's it.
Just don't. You'll be so happy.
This is the INKPULP Podcast.
All right, here we go again on this stupid, bus ride into like just awfulness. Except for the fact that we have an awesome guest. I'll introduce him last because he deserves it, right? Shawn, thank you for having us. It is episode 161. Yeah.
Dude, we have to stop. It's episode 4,800.
No, seriously, what is it? I'm gonna get it. What is it?
No, the problem is this. Jamie and I went back and forth this week because we'll say the episode number on the show.
Yeah.
And I'll log it as such, but then like you and I will record an episode which throws all the count off. So then I renumber it. So
let's
Jamie's
make it a thing.
It's
just gonna be our thing,
Right.
We're just shooting numbers at the beginning of the episode, and that's it.
It feels good, though, as we count up, and I miss it by an awful lot because I don't care about this show. Shawn, thank you for having us on. And by us, I mean the other guy who kind of looks like you, but a little bit better in sunshine. Mattteo Scalera is here. But the more important component of this episode is our esteemed guest, Mr. Jake Parker. Hey, man, thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I love the podcast, too. I've been catching up on the last few episodes or the last couple of months of episodes too. So
that's awesome.
That's awesome. Thanks, man.
All that money that Shawn is sending your way is helping out, man. Thank you so much for allowing us to bribe you.
Yeah. So far, we're just spending a lot of money
offline
on this podcast so far. Hopefully, it's a good investment. But we'll see. We'll see.
You'll see how it's doing with like the amount of books behind Shawn just like getting smaller and smaller as he's selling off assets. In Matteo's case, the copier will be gone.
Soon you're just going to see a field behind me. I don't have a studio anymore.
Shawn is just shooting it.
No fish tank for me anymore.
Not even his anymore. Dude, you got to clean that fish tank. You and I talked about it last time we talked.
I didn't
Mattteo,
know
we're getting lots of questions about that thing.
It's
a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. But just so you know, so we'll be leaving in a few days for New York. And when we leave, since nobody's coming here to feed them, I just put them in a smaller bowl and they stay at my mother-in-law place. So she feeds them. Yeah. And once I do that, I'll clean up the tank and give them new water and everything. So, they're in a few episodes, you're going to see them in a nice bowl, in a nice water.
You take them out of that Chernobyl tank, they're going to die. They are literally made to
I think they're going to see Mattteo
soup.
walking back after being away for a week, and they're going to kill themselves right in front of him.
All right. And on that happy
note.
Don't
take me back.
On that happy note, Jake, thank you so much, dude.
No, I appreciate it. And I was going to say, in the background, Mattteo has this copy machine, and I'm always looking at that and thinking, oh, I want a copy machine so bad.
Oh yeah.
Do you still want one?
It's great, and I had it for a good price because the guy just is a friend and just told me, okay, it's gonna be like it should be X amount of money, but I'm going to give you a huge discount and you're going to do a painting for me. And he's still waiting after 3 years. And, but whatever.
Of course.
Yeah.
What a good deal.
What do you use it for? Are you blowing up layouts on that thing?
Yeah. I do that. And also I scan stuff with it because it's a scanner too.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a scanner. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd be making zines on that thing all the time if I had a copy machine.
There it is.
That's some old school.
There's our segue right there. But one more thing, like from an influencer standpoint, like if you ever look through like Instagram or whatever the heck it is, like if you're a fitness influencer, there's a gym in the background. If there's like a whatever finance influencer, there's like multiple cars in the background. Matteo's like, what can I do to really show people that I've made it as an artist? You know what I mean? Oh, a copying machine. Yep, I'm going to put that back in the background.
And a green fish tank.
Yeah. Yep.
Dude, Jake, let's talk about you making zines, pal. You sent us, we talking about this offline. You sent us advances of the stuff that you've worked on so far. Give us a chronology of like where, like this stuff is so polished now, right? And I remember Rocket Mouse being an online strip that you used to do. Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's turned into this whole universe. Like the most recent thing, I was like, oh my gosh, he's got like 15 characters in this one fight scene, which is, I've lost track, admittedly, ashamedly, I lost track of where it went, but like, wow, you've built this into the strip that it is now, dude. Give us a small chronology of that real quick.
Chronology. So I was that kid. We'll go back. I was that kid in high school who was always drawing, and I loved comics. The comic shop was serendipitously like right next to the fabric store that my mom went to. And one day she comes home, she's like, hey, there's this comic shop next door. It was Atomic Comics in Mesa, Arizona. I walked in there. Prior to that, it was just, the spinner rack at Circle K or whatever, And I walk in there and I was like, what is an X-Man? What is Macross? Well, I knew Robotech, the cartoon, but here's a Macross comic, What is Akira? Like, what is Battle Angel Alita? Right. So it was all over then. I was like, I'm going to be going to this comic shop every week. And so I was that kid that was always drawing. And I ended up getting into, long story short, getting into animation. And for 12 years, I worked in the animation industry from the age of 21 to 33 or something like that.
Mm-hmm. What did you do in animation?
My first film, I worked for Don Bluth on Titan AE.
Wow. That was so cool.
Yeah. I was this kid, foot in the door, working in we were the assistants to the assistants of the animators, the in-between department. So this was hand drawn. Everybody you just heard pencil sharpeners going all day.
Yeah.
In the department.
Yeah, I did.
And I dropped out of school to take this job. And I was naive thinking like, okay, how many hours a week do you want me to work? They're like, dude, this is a full-time job. And I was like, oh, I guess I can't do school and do this job.
Right.
When you say school, do you mean high school or college?
This was college. I was at a community college locally. And it was another lucky thing that for tax reasons, Fox Animation Studio opened a studio in Phoenix, so they could still have like easy airplane access to the studio, but not have to pay California taxes or whatever. And so I was in Mesa, which was 30 minutes away from the studio. My high school art teacher, I was visiting him, just keeping in touch. And he's like, hey, you should take your portfolio down to this place. I bet you could maybe get a job there. And they saw enough of it. I guess they were desperate. They're like, okay. And I did a test, an in-between test. And I'd never animated before. And there was a guy that I knew who worked there who had a light box and a pegboard thing that you could do the animation paper. And he's like, yeah, I'll show you how to do it. And so I went over to his house one night and he just showed me like the fundamental animation principles, how to flip pages, how to do the drawing in between the two drawings. And he gave me a little pin thing, and some paper, and he gave me some things to practice. And for 2 weeks straight, I just practiced animating. And then I took this test, and it was like an 8-hour test, take Anastasia. Whoa. She's in her dress twirling. Wow. And you got to do it's 8 drawings. You got to do 8 drawings that go in between. And it like, I blew a fuse in my brain throughout the middle of the day. I skipped lunch. I turned it in, and then 2 weeks later, they're like, "Yeah, we got a position for you. Come on in."
That's awesome.
And, wow!
And so that was animation. This has turned into a long story, actually. But so I was working in animation. That led to concept art, from animation to concept art to art department type of stuff.
Yeah.
All the while, though, I was like, I had this love for comics, and so I always was doing. I had this goal to like do one finished project a year, right? And I felt like more if I could, but and by finished project I meant something deliverable, something I could hand to somebody and say, here, look at it, hold it, buy it, whatever,
right?
And so it started out being these little zines, like taking them down to the copy shop. It was like a sketchbook. Actually, I have it right here. So this was 2002. This was just a collection of my sketches.
Yeah, I remember this.
Black and white, just straight up photocopies. And then that same year, I also did this Missile Mouse comic.
I remember that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it was just my like, I'm going to learn how to do comics, and I'm going to learn it from doing this. And I remember Dave Johnson was my idol. And I was at San Diego Comic-Con. I'm like, well, here, can you look at this? He's like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Yeah. And he wanted to keep in touch. And
wait, Dave was nice and happy and excited.
I was going to say, dude,
it was a long time ago, Shawn. That's why.
Yeah.
Before the industry broken down.
Yes, before he was broken.
Before the dark times.
No, but I was Super Patriot was a huge like impact.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that was awesome stuff.
Yep.
That was great stuff.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is legit doing anime style like hard surface rendering stuff and bringing it to comics. Because my frustration because the comic shop opened me up to all the Japanese stuff too, I realized like you could actually draw a gun that looked like a real gun and not just, a cylinder with a handle on it. Right. And so my frustration with a lot of American comics is phoning in some of these technical details while focusing so much on anatomy and like poses and stuff. And here was Dave Johnson doing what the Shiros and the Otomos and the Katsuhiros and all these, these different artists that I loved over there. He was like taking that and applying it to American comics, which was all the cool action poses and the vibrant colors and this amazing technical detail. Anyway, so that's why I loved him. And if you looked at Missile Mouse, I tried to do that. And you could see like paying really close attention to what does the design of this jetpack look like? And these pouches have actual like dimension to them and stuff. Yeah. So anyways, comics was a thing. There's a guy named Kazuo Kibuishi who is big in, with the Amulet series, right? Which ends, book 9 comes out in February. And that ends that saga. But he was starting an anthology, and it was called Flight. And I essentially said, dude, count me in, invite me in. He didn't reach out to me. And I, through a friend, got to him. He's like, oh, actually, you're on my list of people to contact for this. So we all got together and did our Flight stories. And it was all sort of people in web comics and sort of animation, trying our hand at comics, storytelling, taking ownership of a story.
Hey, Jay, can I follow up on something like that? Because that clearly is there was an era there, and you said like, was it 2000? What is that? 2003 earlier?
Yeah,
right.
2002, 2003.
Yeah, that's why I was in my head. I was doing the math, and I thought like, wow, there was an era there in which that really tight knit, but also in a way, sort of like, decentralized community. We're all going to the same place and just sharing work, and I think that's how you were all kind of exposed to each other in as far as like your work and sort of like who you were as artists and your goals as individuals, professionally and personally. So it's kind of interesting to think about, where that has led you to, and if there is a newer version of that, whatever, close to 20 some odd years later,
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So that's I think what happened was that was just a natural effect of the internet landing the way it landed.
Right.
Forums were the first initial like social media. It was the forum. You'd go, and there were art forums, right? There was forums for everything. And I actually so wish we could go back to that version of the internet. I don't like this idea that everybody has to be at Grand Central Station.
Yes.
I like that. Let's go to, these little alcoves and like spend time with like-minded people. And
it seemed like the community was more embracing of each other, whereas now it's so divisive. Like it would be great to I would love to see that.
It's just too noisy too.
Yeah.
It is.
It's too,
because
there's
like you said, everyone's
also
there now. So, of course it's going to be noisy and, some of the worst aspects of human beings are going to, come out. So.
Right. Plus the nice thing about it too was the pace was spend 30 minutes to an hour just going through and looking at stuff on it, then go away from that because it was only available on your desktop, computer. Then go away from that, go create something and post it on the forum, maybe drawing a week, a finished piece a week, a finished piece every few days. You get feedback on it. You get critiques. You get like really thoughtful responses. And it just wasn't this grind where it's like, no, you have to post every day. You have to, not only do you have to post, you have to be like a production studio and make a video of your drawing, right? Which Shawn, you're actually really good at that.
Oh, thanks, dude. It takes a lot of time.
I just want to say, I see you. I see the work that's going in there.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So anyways, you just made his week, Jake. He is going to go, he is going to put on Shawn is just going to go put on a pretty dress. And he is just going to love the idea that you gave him a compliment.
Hey, Matteo's the one wearing dresses on this show.
I'm going to let my dog out really quick.
Yeah, no worries.
Do it, man.
All right, go ahead.
This is the problem when we have guests who are trying to be like cool to you, It just goes straight to your head. I spend weeks beating you down, just weeks, as much as I can.
We're going to have a lot more guests on the show.
I feel like... The thing is, you are such a bright ray. Like you just have like this unending Nova star in your chest, Shawn. It doesn't take much to restart. I do everything I can to dump as much cold, disgusting space into there, but it doesn't work, dude. Because Jake says one nice thing, and I see you light up. I thought it was the sunshine or like the lamp coming from behind you, but you light up. Somebody said something nice to me, and you're like, "Wee, this is my week." Sorry, Jake, we interrupted.
No, it's all good. It's all good. My dog interrupted. That's what happened. But so comics, that was like the first foray into published comics, and Flight was like a success. And it ended up going on for 8 volumes and a spin-off like kids version or an all ages version. I guess Flight was pretty much all ages, but there's one more focused towards younger audiences. What that did though was my break was Kazoo's like, hey, will you do the cover for Flight Explorer, which was 10 short stories, all geared towards the middle grade or the younger grade thing. So I did a Missile Mouse story in there with a Missile Mouse cover. Right. And Scholastic saw that and said, we've got Bone, we've got Amulet, we've got Smile. Let's see if we can get something sci-fi. And they reached out to me and they're like, we really like Missile Mouse. Let's do a Missile Mouse thing. So I got a two book deal with Scholastic to do the Miss Mouse graphic novels. And this was me, like, I made it. I'm officially like a comics artist. I was still working at Blue Sky Studios in.
That's what I was about to ask. If you're still working in animation as well. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So my day was wake up, and I also had 3 kids, right?
Oh,
so my day was
wow.
Yeah, wake up, eat breakfast with the kids. My wife was really good about this. Is my biggest advice in life is partner up with an amazing person, because it's going to make the journey so much easier. Right?
Dan, I think I made a huge mistake then.
I was going to say, man.
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm glad you said it, Mattteo.
No, my girlfriend's amazing, but it was.
I wasn't going to make the joke. I wasn't going to make the joke, but I was eyeballing Mattteo the entire time, going like,
I'm going to say that. Yeah.
I like how excited he got.
Anyway,
next week we're having Francesca on the show.
Yeah, for sure.
That would be interesting.
All right, I'm sorry, Jake. Go ahead.
No, it's good. No fun. We're telling stories. No. No. So my day was eat breakfast with the kids. I was just going to say my wife was like, the kids are going to have they're going to face whatever the demons are going to face throughout their day. So let's start their day with a warm breakfast and family time together. So they know that sort of anchors them, right? It was good for me too.
Oh yeah.
Because
that's great.
I would come home at 6:30 in the evening. Dinner would be ready, eat it with the kids. The kids would go to bed, and then I would, kiss my wife and then go down in the basement and work on the comic till 1 a.m. and just repeat that over and over. And I did that for 2 years straight to get these graphic novels out.
Holy cow.
How old were you at this time?
What's that?
How old were you at this time?
30s, early 30s. So it was like between 30 and 32, 33.
And getting that little sleep, you were functional?
I made a deal with God, and that was I will destroy myself throughout the week just grinding on this. But essentially, I'll take a Sabbath once a week. I'm just going to rest, not even think about it, not even look at artwork, look at my artwork, spend the day, sleeping in, going to bed early, spending time with loved ones and focusing on things other than my career during that day.
That's great.
And it saw me through. Like I was just like, okay,
that's
this
amazing.
is how I can do it.
And that was
can I mention
Saturday
something really
or
quick,
Sunday?
Jake, before?
Just curious.
That was Sunday.
Sunday. Okay.
Yep.
Let me point something out. As soon as you said I made a deal with God, did you see how furrowed Shawn's brow? You said something incredibly foreign to him. He's like, "What is this God thing that you're talking about? Is it like aliens? Is it the same thing as aliens? Because I've heard of aliens." That's basically where it's like. So when he asked you, "Hey, how old were you?" and then you said I made a deal with God, and he was like, "Well, I'm out." Because I'm a pretty godless heathen right now. So let me figure out what this God thing is. And I'll come. Is that what it, Shawn? I thought that's the face that you were making.
No,
am I accurate?
I think you misread me entirally.
All right, we'll talk about it offline. Continue, Jay. Sorry. That's what it looked like.
Poor Shawn. Shawn just can't get a break.
Especially now that you gave him a great
podcast,
compliment.
Jake.
We got to compensate with a bunch of insults.
We got to overcompensate now.
No, I'm instead of making a deal with the devil, it was a deal with God.
It is.
So anyways, the book came out. It was successful enough. It wasn't a runaway success like a smile or a bone or an amulet, which were Scholastic's big hitters during that time. And so they're like, you know what? It sold 100,000 copies. Which,
by the way,
amazing,
today
right?
would be
That's great.
That's freaking amazing,
incredible.
dude.
Yeah, that's a graphic novel. That's not a floppy. That's a graphic novel.
Jake, give us a point of reference. When you say 100,000, right, and they say, "Oh, that's not really as successful as our expectations are." What was Bone? What was Amulet?
You know, it was 1/10. It was one.
Shit.
Yeah.
Oh my
Bone
God.
was crazy.
Well, and those numbers pale in comparison to Dogman today. Have you looked at Dogman's numbers?
I have.
Dogman is selling 300,000 copies a month.
Yeah.
Whoa.
You know, across all Dogman books, right?
Yeah.
So Jeff Kinney, he's doing really good. He's made it. He actually made
a great understatement.
He made a go at it. Anyways, and this is going to go into, I think, going to segue nicely into something I was talking about Shawn in the email. But I always wanted to be that guy who worked from home and worked on his stuff and made the comics and was sort of like this auteur of like comics, right? And so the problem with me was supporting kids, and I was supporting, I was single income. It was sort of all on me. And how do you get that runway, that financial runway, going long enough so that you can actually, lift off, right? And I knew that I couldn't do it full time working at a studio. I had to have more time in the week to do it. A job came up out of the blue, and it was BYU reached out and said, we need a temporary for like 2 years or a year, a professor, a visiting professor position, because they had a hiring freeze, but they had money for a visiting professor, which essentially wasn't a long-term commitment, but it was still the same benefits, same pay as like a full-time professor, not adjunct. Adjunct is like, a percentage of what a full professor makes. So I was like, oh, this is good. The deal was work 2 days out of the week, meetings on Wednesday, but then you have 2 days a week that they want you actually working on something in your field of expertise.
You are kidding. Right? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a good deal.
That's how college used to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not scab.
So I was like, honey, we're moving to Utah. And so we moved the family out to Utah. I worked there for a couple of years. I was like, let's try and get the full-time position when this hiring freeze was over. One big hang up though was I never finished college, and they want college graduates teaching college. Right. So, so that job was out of the picture. I got a sort of I wasn't ready to go full time on my own yet. So I had to get like a in between job, and I worked for an education company doing like, there's like a Spanish learning program, and I was doing animation and stuff, art for that. And I gave myself 1 year. I'm like, I'm going to do this for 1 year, and then I'm quitting, and I'm doing this full time. And that year came and went, and I still wasn't there yet. And I was so depressed. I was like, golly, why can't I make this work? And something happened in the next 3 months where Google came in with like this great freelance job. Another freelance job came in. I got another book deal, and I knew, I launched this Kickstarter for Antler Boy. I sent you that Antler Boy thing. Yeah. And that thing did really well. And Kickstarter was a new thing too. This was like 2012, Kickstarter was only around
sorry
for
to
a couple
interrupt,
years.
Jake,
and I was like,
but
okay, wait.
All the stories that you were talking about, you still had the copyrights for them, basically. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So I looked at that and I realized, okay, I have a 6 month, maybe even an 8 month runway of income. And I'm like, if I can just keep going, keep adding another analogy, keep adding railroad track, then this train will have something to go on. Right. Yeah. And so I quit my job, and for the last 10 years, I've been laying track and just keeping this thing going. And
that's so cool.
Trying to do all kinds of things. In the last 10 years, I started a thing called Inktober. I started a school online education platform called SVS Learn, where we teach fundamentals and really specifics on illustration, how to do illustration, how to do children's books. I did 10 children's books. I did, what else? Just a bunch of freelance work, and then like 6 Kickstarters as well. This is the last self-published book
by
I
the
did
way,
last year.
Yeah.
that book is beautiful, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amazing.
That not just the, what do you call it? I mean, we got the digital versions of it. I'm talking about just on pure content alone, Jake. Like, I'm glad I saved that one for last, because somehow I got in my head that was your most recent offering, your latest offering. So I thought, like, I'm going to try to look at this from a pure craft standpoint, how much growth that you've had. So I'm glad that naturally I landed on that one the last, because as I was looking through it, I was just telling this to Shawn before you came into you got into the green room. I was like, geez Louise, there's stuff happening in here that is so sophisticated by way of its concepts, its execution, and just the overall ideas, right? And I was like, but he's doing it in such a consumable way. You know, like people look at it and they're not, like, for instance, the best explanation that I can do is like when you see concept art for Star Wars and they're doing the big old like rendered spaceships, you know?
Yeah.
Like people look at that and go like, oh my gosh, that's a spaceship and it's Star Wars. But from a person who's trying to get better at their craft, it's almost intimidating because it doesn't give you. This sounds really sort of, it's a little squishy, but it's like it doesn't give you handles to go like, I think I can wrap my mind around that.
Yeah,
you know. When I'm looking through this book, not because it's simple, but there's just a way in which it is. Again, the word that I use is consumable. Just the way it's like it's easily understandable.
Yeah.
Right. And that is such a huge deal for somebody who's looking at it going, how do I, you know, begin to wrap my mind around designing spaceships, designing hard surface stuff, you know, because everything, a ton of the offerings, I'd say, I'd hazard to say about 90% of the offerings out there is more derivative of like stuff that they've seen so far. But your execution is, hey, and I think it's built into the way you draw is, let me handhold you through how I made this thing, you know? And so it's not surprising to me when I hear you say like, I did 10 children's books, and I'm all like, I get it. Jake is thinking in that capacity, you know, not simplifying, but hand-holding, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, that does. Yeah. The whole conceit of that book is, what if you took those visual dictionary books, those incredible cross-section books, you took just a straight up art book, like scans of sketches, and a comic book, like a graphic novel, and you stuck them in a blender and poured out, you know, a smoothie. And that's the Spaceships book is essentially those things, me trying my best to seamlessly fit them all together so that you're reading a story, but you're also going into the world building of the spaceship stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to scan through it really quick. We're not going to show all of it, but I mean, look at this. What you're looking at right now is on the execution level, all of these sort of the full Crayola box of colors, you know, that in and of itself, if my son saw this, he would lose his mind because it's so colorful. And like I said, it's so like easily for him to understand. Here's the front part of the spaceship. Here's the back end. Here's the engine part. He'd lose his mind, you know?
Yeah.
But then I look at it from a design standpoint, especially there's pages here like this, where I'm like, this is so smartly done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's so easy to understand not just that, you know, when you're coming at it from a design perspective, you always think like, okay, there's got to be a form and there's got to be a function. And oftentimes form follows the other, you know?
Yeah.
I think you capture that, you know, really well.
Thank you. And I think
I understand the working end of things, you know, it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I spent years in the art department for animation, 3D animation, right? So you're thinking functionally. You're not just thinking design, but you're also thinking okay, this thing has to be modeled in 3D. Yeah. So I got to do the front, back, side view of it. And you got to think, how does it functionally work, like in universe? And so when I'm sitting there drawing, I'm doing that all the time. I can't just sit down and draw a spaceship that's in the background. I have to like, you know, I think about where was that spaceship built? How did it end up in this scene? You know?
Yeah. You were doing something like that in one of your previous stories that you collected in the Antler Boy. There's there's this story that comes back with this girl that encounters different alien species. And sometimes you just interrupt the story to show the, how do you call it, the section of the monster, so you can see the internal organs and stuff like that. So it's nice. It's a thing that you can tell that it's yours, and it's in you to analyze everything from this perspective, and also the ability of just including it into a story, into a standard comic book story, and still make it work. It's fascinating.
Eric, did you just get the impression that like that was Mattteo on book report day, where he didn't read the book, but he read one chapter?
Let me say this. Let me tell you this, just for our audience, okay? And I think we need to do a better job of doing this. Jake is a professional. He's done these kinds of interviews, I suspect, multiple times, to the point where he knows, like, hey, if there's an opportunity for me to share the work and we can do a slideshow of it, and obviously get everybody on the hosting side up to speed about the work that I've done, I'll give them, all the work that I can. Makes total sense to me. Shawn shared this with us. When did you give it to us, Jake? About 2 weeks ago, I think, right around the time where we solidified the hour and the time, right? And so Shawn said, hey, let me distribute it to you guys. Come and take a look. I got to it as recently as about 3 days ago, maybe a little bit before. And I was like, geez, man, there's what I remember was the yellow missile mouse. What do you call it? Ash can, for the lack of a better term, that you got. And so when I ran into the universe that you had built around him, I was like, I am way behind. I am embarrassingly way behind. Right. Mattteo pinged us this morning.
About the spaceship book, I looked at them, but
he was
slowly.
Like, dude, did you see all this stuff? Yeah. And at first I thought, like, this fucking guy just started doing his book report this morning. Like he just, it was due today and he got behind the computer and it was just like, I got 2 hours,
Jake,
man.
In 10 minutes, might as well look at this stuff that they sent over 2 weeks ago.
What do I say? But here's, that's the cynical part, right? The optimistic part, I was like, oh, no, it's because that's how Matteo's brain works. Like, if he literally did not see it 10 minutes before the show starts, if he looked at it 3 weeks ago, he might as well have not looked at it. So he's going to look at it 10 minutes ahead of time, 5 minutes ahead of time. And that's when it's fresh in his brain. And he can make such an acute analysis of what you just put, because if he read it 2 weeks ago, he'd be like, oh man, I think that's thing. And then he'd start describing Saga to you, or like another book that he just recently read.
I think that's part of the dumb shark effect. Is one of the symptoms.
Right.
All right, I've derailed it. Jake, you were saying.
No, so I guess in this overall like story arc of my career, it's been I sort of have these two things, and it's the thing that every artist deals with. How do you make a living at it while still doing the thing that you are good at and love to do, right? And so I finally came up with this like Venn diagram where there's 3 questions you have to ask yourself. Yeah. Number 1, who do you serve? Who do you want to serve? Who do you get out of bed in the morning like excited and anxious to serve? And there's 3 possibilities there, right? There's, do you want to serve an employer? So you do really well with someone giving you an assignment and you love delivering on that assignment and being like, yeah, look what I did, and getting that pat on the back and that paycheck. Do you love serving a fan base? So there's a group of people who are just excited to see what you're creating, and they give feedback on it. And if the fan base isn't happy with something, you want to please them. So let's do what we can do to like serve this fan base. And number 3, do you want to serve yourself? You don't care about an employer or a fan base. It's only, does it make you happy? Does it fulfill you? Right. And so as soon as you figure that out, and it doesn't have to be all of one of those things, it could be a percentage of something, but as soon as you figure that out, then you know where you're going to be most successful. The next question is, how do you serve? Like, how best do you create? Right. So are you a person who likes to work at home alone, and be the A person on the project, or do you work better in a team environment? Do you work better, in an office or something like that? And then the last one is how, let's see, who do you serve? How best do you work? And what's like your temperament? What's your threshold of like security versus adventure, right?
Yeah.
Like, are you willing to take a risk? Do you thrive under pressure? Or are you a person who's more wanting to have that like security and more of a sure thing? And once you figure all that out, then you're gonna be really successful if you're an artist working at an animation studio versus working, a home alone on a comic book, right? And there's some people who may be good at drawing comics, but it kills them to not see anybody for weeks on end because you are working alone, right? And they're very social, and they're sort of suffocating with the aloneness. Then there's, you might be the person who your art may be really geared towards animation, the animation style, the kid style, but you are that person that doesn't want to be around anybody. You don't want to collaborate with people. And so you have to find, once you can figure that out about you, and it might take years for you to figure that out and lots of experimentation, but once you can figure that out, then you can figure out where you best fit and what job kind of works for you. And as soon as you figure that out, I think that's where success lies. And I'm not talking just financial success, but also like personal, emotional success as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's so many you go through these, especially in social media, you go through these cycles in which people are like giving out free advice, because it's free and it's easy. And as far as like what works for them, and you get a clash of ideals. You shouldn't grind, you shouldn't hustle. Usually, like, that hustle culture is really toxic, and you get the whole sort of laundry list of things that is right and what's wrong and whatever. But I think at the core of what you're talking about is just that personal sort of reflection and discovery. You're going to get advice free because it's free. It does not mean it's immediately applicable to you. It's just one more point of reference. But until you actually do the heavy lifting of figuring out what works to you, right? Your thing right now, put yourself through these paces until you figure out it's somebody else's plan that you're adopting, and it may not feel good to put on their sweater because it was made for them, So I think to say that, hey, hustle culture is toxic, I guess generally you could say that, but there's plenty of times on this podcast where we talk about, to your point, you said, hey, I will sacrifice for X amount of time because I've identified for myself, I need to do this right now. And then, but as a, what do you call it? As a respite from that, I'm going to give myself a day. Right. I think people need to figure that out for themselves. And oftentimes when they hear us talking about like grinding and putting in the hours ahead of time, some people, depending on where they are, and I can be really dismissive. Well, Shawn most specifically, but I can be really dismissive of a younger culture who don't look at like that grind that we went through. They go look at it as like, oh, you guys are a bunch of old farts, and that's not necessarily critical anymore. We disagree, but what I would agree more with is to say, yeah, it may not work for you, but it does not mean that it's, but you have to go discover that for yourself rather than taking a posture of something that you've never experienced for yourself and you've only heard from somebody else. Sure, it sounds ideal, but heaven forbid you try it and you don't see that quote unquote success that you're talking about, Jake. And you're like, oh, it's because you adopted somebody else's plan, and you didn't try it for yourself. I think that's worth.
Right.
Sorry, Matty, I interrupted you.
No, I was about to ask Jake because I totally agree with this, the three questions. And how long did it take you to, create this kind of, to find out about this kind of theory, to create it within yourself? Is it something that was always in you, or it's something that you realized, recently or halfway through your career? Because it's a really, I totally agree, and it's a really interesting theory.
Yeah. It gelled for me maybe a year ago, and I had been working on that for a couple of years prior to that.
Yeah.
Though. And I think what really clicked for me was figuring out, because I always knew like, okay, are you risk averse or are you, more of an entrepreneurial type of, I always kind of knew that kind of thing. And when people come to me for advice, okay, you want to do this particular path, you're gonna have to, either you and your partner, if you're married or living with someone, you are going to have to work with them as well. Are they risk averse? Are they able to handle the stress? So that was like one of it, but it all sort of came together. And the last sort of thing was, who do you serve, was like my biggest aha moment, where it's like, if you don't care what anybody thinks about your art, then maybe art isn't going to be a good career for you. Because ultimately, if you want to make it a career, you have to, you're providing a service. You're either providing a service to an employer who's hiring you to make something that they can sell, or you're making something that will sell to a certain subset of people. That's why with the spaceships book, it was like the perfect overlap of my interests, but also making something for the market. Yeah. There's a reason spaceships is large and big on here, because that is something that I could easily say, you love spaceships? Yeah. Here's a spaceships book for you. Yeah. Whereas if it was titled, right. Whereas if it's titled like Kepler's Adventure, adventure is too broad, right? Kepler, what does that even mean? Yeah. It's the character in the book. But, it was very specific and intentional for me to call it spaceships, so that I could, so it was like an easy buy for someone who's into spaceships, which it turned out to be. I mean, this was an $85,000 Kickstarter, right? So
congratulations, pal.
Congrats, man.
Really well done.
Yeah, I don't understand though, because this year I launched a robots Kickstarter, and it's the same exact template format. It's Writer's Intergalactic Guide to Robots, but that one did $20,000 less. I don't know if that's the economy, or if people just aren't as into robots as they are spaceships, or what went on there. But and that sort of leads me to this thing I was talking to Shawn about on making a career in comics, or making a career in publishing. I haven't had runaway success with that. Whereas and by runaway, I mean, I haven't had the type of success where I can just show up and make a book once a year or twice a year or something like that, and that be all that I do. I'm always have to like supplement it. Well, that one didn't do very well, so let's make sure we're doing this. So, I've got to take some freelance work. Some bills are coming up. Now we're doing freelance. And my theory is, and maybe I'm wrong, and I want you guys, because you guys are way more dialed in than I am, but my theory is, based on economics, if you have a healthy middle class, right, that means your economy is doing well, because a very big healthy middle 100%. Class means the lower class is able to advance, and the upper class, their whatever money's being made there is accessible to the middle class as well. Yes. And I worry that in comics, there's no middle class, because everybody I know who's working in comics is either doing it on the side because they can't make a living from it, or they're living a very lower class lifestyle so that they can make comics, like just barely paying rent, or they're doing so well, they're making $500,000 a year. Their books are selling like hotcakes. They're selling 1 million copies here. They're doing like, I just see like this disparity between the two. And I don't know very many people, and maybe they're there and I just don't know them. I don't know very many people are making a healthy middle-class living in comics, where they work for 40 hours a week. They're able to save a little bit of money for retirement. They're able to have health and benefits. Maybe they can go on vacation once a year or something like that. And they're not grinding themselves to death. Yeah. So that's the question I pose to you, does that theory hold water, or am I off base there?
Shawn, Mattteo?
You want to start, Shawn?
Go ahead, Mattteo.
Okay. Well, for me, it's hard to answer the question, because for me, it's sorry, I didn't hear you. You know the delay, so I just.
He goes like this. He goes, "Do you want to start, Shawn?" Okay, I'll do it. Go ahead, get out of here.
No, because as I was saying, Shawn said Mattteo. So you got to remember they have a 2 seconds delay. So when he said it,
That's
I immediately started. So for me,
I love this stupid podcast.
You have to consider that I don't live in the States. So probably my idea of middle class is different than the US idea of a middle class. But so I think that in general, if you live in Italy, you can have a good life with less money, needing less money than you would need if you lived in the States. So that's why, in general, since I think that, in this last 10 years, there's a lot more Italian artists working for US companies like Marvel or DC. Those, most of them have become really quickly middle class with the money that DC and Marvel can give you, even without needing a top tier, how do you call it, top tier rate. You can have a good life, be able to afford a nice house, so it's hard for me to
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would that lifestyle be sustainable if you were just doing Italian comics or just European comics?
It would be definitely, I would make way less money. I would be lower middle class by what I think your parameters were. I would be working my ass off and be low middle class probably. So I still had to make sacrifices and stuff.
See, I think that's a part of the problem there is you have this publisher who essentially isn't raising their rates in relationship to inflation. And so ideally you, Matteo, should be making a middle-class lifestyle in the US with the amount of work that you're doing. But instead, to the publisher, I'm taking a shot at DC or Marvel or whatever. They're like, oh, we can get this guy in Italy for half what we could get, a guy in the States.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let's go
definitely.
with this guy in
I
Italy.
totally agree with you.
It makes great sense business-wise, but I don't think it makes sense overall health-wise for long term. For sort of a long view of a healthy economy, a comic book economy, it seems like, and I don't know how. I mean, the publishing it's hard. Comic shops are having a hard time. It seems like, right. So I don't know if this is just the final, the last hurrah of comics, and it's all shifting towards graphic novels and manga and like middle grade comics, and that's where the careers are going to be at. These are the questions that I'm asking, and I'm just wondering like what does a person do who wants to have a career at this? Are they going to try and win the lottery and get a $1 million book deal or something like that, or are they going to grind
just to
for
close
20 years?
Like what I was about to say is I never cared about this thing that since I'm in Italy I can get less money and still make a good living here. I'm still thinking as if I'm a US artist, so I kept like every X amount of years I keep asking for more and I don't care. And if they don't give it to me, I'm going to say, okay, I'm sorry, then I can't do it. That's my attitude. And I don't know if everybody would do that, if every, the publishers will start behaving differently. I don't know, to be honest with you. But that's my way of taking chances. Going back to your 3 questions, I'm definitely a person that like to take chances, and I don't care about the safety of, and in general, having the same work, the same routine, and stuff like that. How about you, Shawn?
Go ahead, Shawn.
All right, so Jamie, you can go black and white right now.
Oh, is that moment?
Jake, there's a thing they do in this show.
Okay,
there's a
we're
thing
doing
they do in
so
this
well
show that when
until minute 53.
I'll be back. This is awful.
Okay, Eric just left the house.
All right, so Jake, I agree with everything you've said. I am in that lower class, like still trying to figure it out part of the career. I mean, like Mattteo, it seems like from where I stand, you're making a great living, even in the States with the kind of money you're making.
Yeah. Well,
I'd imagine you'd be
I don't
doing
know
very well
is,
here.
Is it smart if I say it? If it's, or it's something really smart?
Money?
Yeah. Or will
leave
blip
money
it
off the table.
I don't know.
It's up to you, but I would leave it off.
Okay, so
I would leave it off.
I'm gonna make like how you say neat. Okay, per year.
Oh, net.
Yeah. Not neat.
Yeah, that's a great living in the States.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's a great living.
You're doing okay, pal.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, you're doing wonderful. But
Jamie,
so,
bleep that out.
just that I'm doing okay.
Sake,
leave the money.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
You're
but
doing
Jake,
fine.
yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, listen, like this whole interview, I'm just like even before, I was up all night worrying about this shit. So yeah, I don't know how to do it. I'm just at that point. I don't know how to make it work. But yeah, it's what the way I look at it. If you're asking like, what would you say to someone wanting to come in? I think creatively, comics are in a very healthy place because we have like your career is a perfect example of we can forge our path. And make our own stuff. And if you're young and you don't have responsibilities, go do it, build it, make it happen. It's great. It's just like me, I've got a wife, I've got kids. Like I like you talked about that runway. I and building those tracks. I want to get to that point where I can see the tracks stacking up ahead of me. And that's what I'm trying to figure out.
It doesn't help that you have an awful cocaine habit, like that keeps derailing.
And you're spending most of your money in glasses.
There's you have a small mansion worth of glasses there, Shawn, if you just kind of exchange them. There's two bits, and I wanted to ask this of you earlier, but I think it helps to answer your question right now, which is like, you could have done all of these things that are more financially, quote unquote, financially sound, but you chose comics. And this is a prolonged conversation, so don't answer it now. But something kept you wanting to come back, right? Like I was about to ask, like, geez, of all the things that you could, involve yourself in, especially if you have limited time, energy, and resource, something kept bringing you back to comics. But that leads into what you're asking about right now, which is, and this is just theory, I haven't proved it out yet. But you opened up the part of the question, you opened it up with like, comics is very hard, right?
Yeah.
And I think at some point when people are in this space of like, do I continue to do this? They self-select out. And that self-selection represents a good chunk of that comics middle class, right? Because they start doing the math. They start doing I'm relevant, right? I'm really, really good in this space. And a bunch of people, you included, have come and ask me to go involve myself in a artistic capacity, but on another thing, on another entity that's not comics. And oh my gosh, I'm being compensated for it so much better for the time that I have. Now you compound that with family, you compound that with financial responsibility. Nothing will bring them back to, it's very hard for me to imagine something will bring them back and take the kind of risk to allow them to do comics full time. So if you're not already ramping up, in Matteo's case, he's like, hey, I'm happy with taking risks because honestly, he's in that really sort of like, great class of the high end, he just, I hope Jamie bleeps it out, but he just mentioned a figure right now where I'm like, dude, in the United States,
or change it into $1 million much a year. Instead of
there you go. Yeah. Just matches ego and personal outlook, But I mean, so to me, the answer isn't that there isn't an economy for it. I think it's tied to people who are opting in and out, right? The people who are at the bottom end, right, which is on the poor. Like this is a weird terminology, but I get what you're going for. From the poorer side to the middle class, they choose to stay there because the opportunity hasn't presented themselves to go beyond it, right? If the opportunity does, I know very few people who will choose the struggle, right? Who will choose just barely getting by, right? As opposed to when they say, hey, come and work in animation, come and work in feature film, come and work in the video game the video game industry or whatever it is, generally in the entertainment industry, in which you can leverage the amount of time and energy that you're putting into every image and saying, hey, there's an equivalent dollar value to it, that will allow me to thrive at the very least financially. And then again, compounded with family, compounded with all these other responsibilities, allow those extensions to thrive as well. So that goes back to my original question of like, you could have been doing these amazing things, right? But something inside of you, and it's hard to encapsulate, it's hard to capture, like what made you keep coming back, right? Because, you're choosing to be not necessarily in the middle class. You're great. The fact that you're like, oh, it did $20,000 less. And I'm like, so I did the really awful math in my head. So instead of 80, you made 60, but that's still good. You like, you're now thinking about, and also because the benefit of that, not just looking at it from the compartmentalized like numbers of it, but it's all yours. It belongs to you. And yet you still choose to, I'm looking at this stuff, Jamie, and this is franchise making, especially the spaceships book. And I haven't seen the robots book, forgive me, but it is a franchise making amount of assets in which you could probably go to town and shop this thing around and it'll turn
By
into
the way,
something.
Eric,
if it hasn't already yet.
You just called in Jamie instead of Jake. Jamie is our editor.
Jake. I'm old. I didn't drink my ginkgo today.
Is Eric going senile on us? Is this the early signs of dementia setting in?
This is the middle early. But my point is like you could have gone, right? But you chose. So my question was, and this ties in parallel to what you're asking, like what is that thing? If you can explain it to somebody who's like in the same level of struggle or same level of opportunity, what was it for you that made you say, I'll stay?
Right. The reason I keep coming back to comics is it's in a way it's the easiest way to get a project made because it doesn't take any startup money. It doesn't take putting a team together. All it takes is you putting in some time, drawing a picture, putting words on it, and you have a thing that exists. You have an IP. For essentially 80 hours of work, you could have an IP, I
love it.
I don't know who said this. I wish I could remember who said this, but he said we lost a generation of comic artists to animation. And that's because there's so many people who would be doing comics because they love it and they have great ideas. But animation pays, and video games as well, they pay so well for the same level of ability, artistic ability. You could be making an easy $125,000 a year working in an art department for a video game company and honestly work 30 hours a week, and the rest is you're in meetings or you're just eating cereal or whatever. And you get full benefits and you get paid time off. And
exactly.
All that stuff. Yeah. So you look at this and it's like, well, why would I subject myself to poverty working on this when I could, work on this IP that I love, and be a part of this story and work on a Star Wars video game or something like that. And I think I don't blame animation. I don't blame video games. I don't know what's going on with comics
Jake,
and publishing that there can't
you're
be more.
on to something. The publishers, the starting rates have gone down for like my starting rate at Marvel. It doesn't exist. It's lower than that now, and that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I remember this started. Sorry to interrupt, Shawn, but this started a few years ago when they started applying the B rates. So for some work, even for big names, they would just propose, B rates. That's sorry. I'm realizing now we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what happened to me when I was about halfway through my exclusive contract at Marvel, they created this system. You had an A book and a B book. And A-rate books had higher budgets and B-rate books had lower budgets. So when they offered you a gig, if it was a B-rate book, you got less for doing the same job, essentially. And so and I'm sure this is what happened with Mattteo, because we were there at the same time, our rates got cut. And I never got an A-rate book. I went from making this much to this much. And so, but the starting rates now, I've talked to a few people about,
they're low.
Like they've seen they're awful. I think it's a little more than half of what my starting rate was at Marvel, and that was 20 years ago. So today, starting at Marvel, 20 years later, you're getting a little more than half of what the starting rate was. So they are paying less and less.
And it's the same on the children's or the graphic novel in the New York publishing side. Those advances are not keeping up with inflation. Plus, the publishing world is so crazy right now in that they're going to break up that advance in 4 installments. So you're going to get a quarter up front. You're going to quarter when you deliver the book. You're going to get a quarter when the book goes to print, and then a quarter when it's published, right? How can you, if it's a healthy, a $50,000 advance, which that's rare from my understanding, from what I've heard people saying, how can you spread out that $50,000 over a 2-year book making process? You have to have either a trust fund or a spouse who works or something like that. I read too. There's a great book you guys might like. It's called Perennial Seller, and it's a book by Ryan Holiday, who's a writer. He does Stoic philosophy books and how they apply to regular life, right? But he wrote a book called Perennial Seller about how to make a perennial seller, how to make a book that's going to just keep selling year after year. And the first half of it is all about the making of it, and the second half is all about the marketing of it. It's a cool book. But in it, he says that essentially all these big publishers in New York, and maybe Marvel as well, I don't know, maybe DC, who's in LA now as well, they have these $1 million rent spaces in high rises. And do you know what pays the rent for those? To Kill a Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye, Of Mice to Men, all of these like classics, right?
Yes.
And those books are still selling hundreds of thousands of millions of copies a year, right? That's what's paying the rent. And so what they're doing now is just casting the widest net possible, putting as many books out as possible, and hoping that the lottery will strike and one of those will become the next perennial seller. And it's just frustrating, right? Like the business could be, again, I feel bad being critical like this, but do you need office space in Manhattan, especially if nobody's showing up to work anymore because everybody's working at home, right? There's got to be a better way to run a publishing business so that the creators can be paid fairly. The people who are actually making the stuff can be paid fairly, and that's an overall publishing thing. But I think some of it applies to comics as well.
I think there's something that you said earlier where you proposed your premise. And I go like, oh, if we assume that your premise is correct, then I understand why there's so many things that are falling through the cracks. But I often, and Shawn and Mattteo can speak to this, I often take a moment to be like, is that even the correct premise to be thinking about? And I guess that's where what you're saying right now is worth talking about, which is like, just because it's been done like this for generations, do you want to continue doing that? Because ultimately, if you point at the goal, right, what are we doing to get to that goal closer? So in the past, and I've said this to a buddy of mine offline just as recently as last night, who also used to be in the comic book industry. I said, like, mainstream comics, as much as we don't want to admit it, a part of their success has a trickle down effect on everything else, not just by way of finances, but obviously through perception as well, right? So the moment you start seeing all of these quote unquote, well, historically perennial books start ramping down by way of numbers that they're moving, it sends a weird message to like, oh, maybe it isn't doing as well. And potentially it's not, but it could be. And that could often lies in this game plan that keeps like this playbook that they keep running. And you go, that playbook doesn't work anymore. Right. So in as much as we were talking earlier about, we used to go to message boards and find community that way, but now we've needed to find a new way to adopt and evolve because there's a different landscape now. Comics has not done things so much differently, and nor are they ever, so they go into maintenance mode, nor are they ever into the bridge building mode. That's not immediately, and they put themselves in this corner because they've done so much work in just trying to maintain. They no longer have the operating budgets to go and build bridges, right? They just want to make sure that the roads that they have are less cracked than they were the years previous, and so on and so forth. So when you go into that space, everything is about like protecting what you have, as opposed to understanding the potential or where it can go, and then going like, if your goal is to get this comic book into as many hands as possible, why are you maintaining the current infrastructure that only facilitates holding on to what you have and potentially losing, right? Why aren't you doing anything if you believe in that business? And I think that's where it comes down to. If you genuinely believe in that business, you are going to build to something that you know isn't going to pay off immediately, but you can see the value of it 5 to 10 years ahead of time. But you don't, and that comes down to me, again, speaking very cynically, that comes to your personnel, right? You don't bring on the kind of personnel that have that kind of foresight to go like, yeah, we have $50 right now, but if you give me 25 of these $50, I'll know how to turn it into $200, and here's what that looks like. And then ultimately the leadership that looks at that person and goes like, okay, go and do that. We'll give you 3 years to make a difference, to prove to us that this thing is that this thing is viable. If you don't have those components, that level of leadership, that kind of staff, you don't vet your personnel, that trickles down to your entire operation. And right now, if I can identify something about mainstream comics in specific, that's what I see. I'm like, oh, everyone's in maintenance mode. Everyone is like, there was a, and this is not a ding on brick and mortar places, but the moment they started trying to go into digital distribution, the brick and mortar places just pushed back so hard it scared the shit out of the publishers. And you go like, it's clear to me that you didn't message that out correctly, because one doesn't have to cull the other. You can have both. You need to be able to proof it out and not get scared, because what you're doing is you're future proofing your business, right? Can you imagine if all we did was say, hey, Apple, only make computers moving forward? That's not a real business. That you have to understand you're not just a computer company, or excuse me, you're not just a desktop computer company, you're a technology company, right? Understand where you can potentially be disruptive. Take the opportunity within means, right? And like I said, Marvel mainstream comics have painted themselves in this corner. Within means, go take a chance on something, and be relentless.
You know what I think the solution should be? We should just tell the companies to ask themselves the 3 questions by Jake. Once they'll be able to answer those 3 questions, probably maybe the CEOs or whoever is in charge there, we ask them the 3 questions. If they are able to, if we find someone who's able to answer them, that's the new CEO.
There's viability in that. I don't know how many times in entertainment, in video games, and in animation, we've had speakers come in and talk to the grander sort of like, you've been part of production before, Jake. So you've been in potentially like guest speakers, like special speakers that come in and talk about their production process. What's great about, some of those instances is that they don't keep it. They don't exclusively make it about the creative side. Sometimes it's about the administrative side. And you get to have insight on like, oh, that's how they think of things. That's how the cost benefit analysis happens on that side of the fence when I'm trying to draw like the best, whatever it is I'm drawing, All right. That's an hour and 12 minutes. That's an amazing conversation.
I think it's the longest podcast we've had. Jake, I would like to ask you real quick if we can get you back, because I do want to have that discussion about art education as well on another episode.
Absolutely. And feel free to reach out anytime if you just want to even chat offline too about it.
I definitely do. I
got some ideas.
Yeah,
awesome. I want to hear them.
Can we end on a sort of a call to action? Like,
awesome.
Not doom and gloom industry. Like, there's no way. I would say let's end on actionable steps for people listening to this. If they're wanting to do comics, how to go about that. Yeah. So
just don't do it. That's it.
Essentially, what just don't do it. You'll be so happy. No, I think at this point in time, you know what, Scotty Young, a friend of mine, he said something to me many years ago. Because I had these sort of same questions with him. We were talking maybe 6-7 years ago, and he said something to me, and it forever stuck to me. And he's like, Jake, do whatever you got to do to make money, but leave comics for yourself. And I keep coming back to that because every time I've tried to make money, like use comics as a vehicle to make money, the comics suffer. And, I'll make some money or whatever, but the comics really suffer. But every time that I really try to make comics for myself, I'm truly like happy and very proud of the work that I do. And having a longer view of it, knowing that as long as you're making something that you're really proud of and that contributes to culture and engages with an audience, then regardless if it makes money or not, I think you might be doing it for the right reason. I think you're going to be happier in that regard.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's where I would leave it at. I don't know.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Well, Mattteo already said his piece. Don't do it. Be a rock star like me. Make the kind of money that I'm making right now. And if you can't, suck it. I think that's what he said.
Yeah, exactly.
Shawn?
I would say just do it. Like Nike says, make comics, put it out on the internet. Just do it. Because you can. Now, coming up, I didn't have that option. So
right. Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sorry, just to add a little thing to this is, I totally agree. Just try as much as you can to do what you like. And even in working for companies, try to find a way to enjoy what you're doing. In my case, if I've spoken about it this various times, is for every new project that I do, even if it's not my stuff, I try to learn a new thing. For example, like I try to learn how to use the specific tool and try to add it to my pages. That just so this whole process means something and not just doing stuff and get paid for it, because otherwise it will kill you, and you'll be dead inside in a matter of a few years,
What the fuck?
Good advice.
Jake is like, let's end this on a positive note. You'll be dead inside.
If you don't do what I say, if you do it, you'll be amazing.
That's true. It's a warning, a caution.
I want every artist to be happy at doing this, because there's very few people who are really, even at the very beginnings of the things that they're the art that they're producing, there's very few people who are lucky, blessed, however you want to phrase it, enough where they actually take the chance of putting pencil to paper or putting out there for people to take a look at, right? Just if the comics is the space that you are thinking about going into, we just got through an hour's worth of conversation about how hard it is. Ultimately, go be happy with your art. Right. Yeah. If there's something that whatever you do, maybe it's not comics, right? But go figure it out, because I think everybody on this conversation knows, when you see somebody who's doing something that they love, it's clear in their work and it's perfectly suited for them. Yep.
Absolutely.
So for me, whenever I hear people going through a level of misery going through comics, I often ask, is this the right thing for you? Right? Because it is hard. Are you okay with hard? Because if it is, great, stay here. You're going to get so much out of it. But if you're here because you feel like it's your only avenue and you haven't stress tested what else is out there, I say go figure it out. Because again, being able to draw, being able to create stuff that makes people go, oh, holy crap, that looks amazing. Very few people have access to it, So I say go figure out what makes you happy and go do that as far as your art is concerned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I
Jake.
really appreciate your time, Jake. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you.
Yeah, this is
one
great.
of the best conversations that we had. So much better than our conversation with Dan Panosian, which was like, if you want to talk about a train wreck of an episode, there it is. That was like the emptiest calorie hour that I was like, I got to be here because I'm here, but I'd prefer not to be. All right, thank you all. I'm going to hit the stop button now.
Bye-bye. All right. What the fuck was that? This is the INKPULP Podcast. This is the INKPULP Podcast. Comics, hip hop, life.